have stories. Every single one of us. From the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, we all have stories. Exploring the world for the greatest stories of all time.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show.
The Aron O'Dowd Show. Our soul is the screen upon which we project our dreams. What's your story?
Hello and welcome. On the Aron O'Dowd Show, we're hosting the second conversation roundtable of Homefulness Ireland. If you want to join the conversation, make sure to like, subscribe, and blast that like button. Today we're talking about communities and how homelessness and homefulness can enhance the communities. And our guest today is Liz Robinson, who's spent years as a social worker in the community, and we have Tony Courtney Brown. Hello, welcome to the show, guys. How are you doing?
Great.
Tony, I know you've experienced homelessness. Tell us about that.
The first time this occurred was when I left college and literally found myself with nowhere to go. So I had some time sofa surfing and some time just being nowhere for a while. And that was really difficult. Now, there's a stigma attached to being homeless, and there's a stereotype of what homeless people are like. And it's all completely wrong. We'll come on to that later. I was very lucky. I got together with some other homeless people, and we formed a short life housing co-op, which put a roof over our heads. From there, I managed to get a job advising homeless people. Then I got a job with the local authority in housing and climbed my way up the greasy pole to become director of housing. That was my ambition, because I thought, let's get to that position and you can really make a change, really impact things. How naive I was. So that's my story with regard to housing and my interest in it, my passion for helping homeless people.
You know, we all live in sheltered homes, but we don't know what it's like to experience. Can you give us an insight or an image of what that experience is?
A large part of it is stress, anxiety, and fear. Living like that starts to have a physical impact on you. What it does to your mental health, which is creating stress, then comes through to the body in various ways. Usually a tight knot in the stomach, vomiting. And the thing about being homeless as well is that you can't eat on a regular basis and you can't eat healthy food. The other thing is that it's very difficult if you've got nowhere to wash your clothes or to keep your clothes, and you're carting them around with you from place to place. And you're always wondering, where am I going to sleep tonight? Where can I go to? It's a very stressful time, and also it's very lonely. And that's one of the other things which I'm going to talk about later, is the impact on mental health that homelessness has, both for individual people who are homeless and for families who are homeless.
Please, as a social care worker, have you experienced people who come in that have homelessness or homeless in some ways?
Yes, I've worked with many people from different sectors of society, specifically people that are escaping family violence, or people that are transitioning from rural centers to urban centers, specifically from reservations or Métis settlements. A lot of people coming into the city, and they come here for a better life. And about 80 to 90% of our population that's in the streets right now are Indigenous. So that's a huge issue in our communities. And I think it has to go further back into the history of Canada with the residential schools and all the unresolved root causes to why there's family breakdowns and why people have come to the place of being homeless.
And working on the ground as a social care worker, do you see similar experiences in Canada that you would see if you kind of what Tony said there in his explanation.
Yes, I think loneliness is a huge issue, as well as the lack of supports and people to navigate them to the right spaces, and also not having enough low income housing uh, solutions for the community as they move in. And that is a huge issue that a lot of cities are dealing.
I think it's interesting as well that whilst homeless people are very visible to a large extent here, during COVID they were not. Somehow the government managed to magic up hotels to put homeless people in, so they were not so visible on the street. Then at the end of COVID restrictions, they all came out again. And I think it's really interesting that during that period, it was seen as a priority to get homeless people off the streets, put a roof over their heads, and then afterwards, not so much a priority.
Wow. You wouldn't think that, but it's the making it the priority is the biggest problem, I would feel and think.
Mhm.
I think
Exactly.
we have a similar issue to what Lisa's talking about, with not enough affordable housing for people. That's one of the issues. The other issue is that at the moment, a lot of people are sick. For instance, in this country at the moment, 2.8 million people are off sick. I don't know how many of those are homeless, but I would dare say that quite a few of them are as well. And it's of concern what is happening to those people. Due to all kinds of changes in employment, a lot of people are being thrown out of work at the moment. And as a result, they can't keep a roof over their head, they can't afford their mortgage, can't afford their rent. And so the stereotype of a drunk homeless person is not at all what makes up the majority of homelessness that we see now.
I tend to agree with you, especially after the pandemic. Many businesses have closed down. People have lost their jobs and end up in the streets because they cannot afford to get get even basic needs met. So, with the housing crunch of the lack of housing and the capability of moving into those low income housing is really a crisis around the world, I believe. Another threat I feel, we had one of the largest natural disasters here in Canada with the fires. Fort McMurray, we saw 80,000 people, evacuees, come to Edmonton, Alberta. And many of those people could not afford to rebuild their homes. I knew specific families who ended up having to go rent apartments in other cities because they could not afford to rebuild, or there was not enough housing to go back to Fort McMurray. And that's a reality, I think, globally of another issue that is plaguing the housing crisis around the world.
And I think what's happened in California recently is being replicated with regard to homeless people being displaced, nowhere to go, and also the added issue there of insurance policies being cancelled, which mean that people cannot rebuild their homes. And, the situation in which a lot of those people find themselves is dire. Now, quite a lot of people think, oh, well, it's Hollywood and they're all okay, they're all very wealthy. No, an awful lot of them are not. An awful lot of them didn't have much to start with, and now they have literally nothing. It's a massive tragedy.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that we, even looking at Southern California, Carolina, what happened there with the floods as well. That is another disaster that occurred. And these things seem to be happening more often. So I think disaster management is another area that we need to address and look at. Because if you're prepared for a disaster and have a place to go to in event something that should happen, that these kind of skill sets are essential, especially in this day and age. And also building homes that can resist some of these disasters, like possibly having more concrete in homes, or even doing the fire burn, like some of the elders in our communities. We had a fire in Jasper, and people cannot rebuild, but we have beautiful natural resources all around there. Indigenous people used to do a fire burn to protect their cities or their towns. So why can't we do that to prevent such crises from happening instead of having our communities torched? And there was warning signs in California before this had occurred. So we need to see who's not doing the work. There is some responsibilities to the human beings that are not doing the work that they are laid out to do. So let's find those people that are not doing the proper work in order to protect our communities and putting them at risk, because that fire burn around LA could have been done and saved thousands of people's lives.
So what can
It's
we
a
do?
very important point. Sorry,
No,
Aaron.
go ahead, Tony. I was going to ask a question.
I was just going to say, to do with fires, that's extremely important. And as you were saying, Lise, they could have dug those trenches, they could have had the burns to make sure that that didn't happen, which is what they did previously. And then there are issues about, from what I hear, budget cuts and things which impacted on that, possibly, but also people not doing what they should be doing their jobs, politicians and officers.
And the example in Lahaina, Hawaii, another issue. Really? A lot of indigenous people live there. And who is going to be there to go buy those lands and make a ton of money off of it and change it into resorts or whatever? I feel that there's something really going on that is sinister out there that needs to be discussed at a larger scale. And hopefully, with the changes that are coming with the world, that people can see through the blurred lines, that we need to change some of the policies of the navigators of these disasters, because it's strange how all the water's shut off. There's no reservoirs in the water. What are we trying to do? Really?
Yeah.
We had the pandemic. Now we have these fires, the floods. What's going to be next?
So with what? So we can isolate and tell this disaster, this happened. What is it? But in change makers, as we all hear on this call and on this episode of the shows, what can we do to change that conversation?
I think it's important that we define those threats and then we look at the opportunities. An opportunity is to have an honest conversation. An honest conversation and a proactive measures to help to mitigate some of these issues. And I suggest that you go to the Homelessness website to have these conversations in your communities so that you can be an advocate for those people that are voiceless in the streets. In Edmonton here, we have so many people that are in the winter times dealing with homelessness. They're making camps all over. So being that advocate of change by saying, we have buses, we have vacant buildings in our cities. Why are we not housing them in there? Let's be the voice of hope, all of us, and unify the solutions.
I think you've hit on a very pertinent point there. Since COVID, a lot of firms are not using their offices to full potential. A lot of firms have policies where they only work 2-3 days a week, perhaps, and they do not have the requirement for the buildings that they have, although they still have the expense of keeping those going. Why aren't a lot of those buildings now being used for residential purposes? If these places don't need them, and this also includes a lot of government buildings as well, certainly over here, why aren't those buildings just being converted and made available for homeless people? I do not understand. Maybe it's too simplistic an equation that I really don't see why that can't happen. Similarly, there are places to build new homes, but then all the planning rules and regulations get in the way to stop that from occurring. So, for instance, people don't want to build on what they term green belt land. They don't want to encroach on countryside.
Mhm.
A lot of the building that gets done is done on brownfield sites, which are sites that have been reused, basically, places that have been demolished and they're rebuilding on that land again. Not all of that is suitable to build on because some of it might have chemicals and things in the ground which make it impossible to build upon. But there seem to be some glaringly obvious solutions to this problem of homelessness, which don't seem to be taken up as seriously or prioritized as much as they ought to be.
I agree 100% with you, Tony. Definitely, we have a lot of buildings that are vacant that can be utilized for housing. I think it's has a lot to do with our political instabilities around the world and their agendas and what is it that they're looking at. I'm thinking about microloans, affordable housing, even the tiny houses really could be effective. And there are examples. We do have the tiny houses here in Edmonton for some of our veterans. It's a micro community. It's effective and it's helpful. And we need hundreds of these kind of communities. We also have Ambrose Place in Edmonton, which is a wraparound program that has culture involved. It has the people in mind that they're serving a lot of Indigenous clientele. So they do have opportunities for them to talk to elders, to smudge every day, to do their prayers and uplift them so that they can become advocates for their own lives. And living communally in that kind of a setting, I think, is ideal. Yes, it might cost more money with the wraparound service at first, but in the long run, you're saving thousands of people's lives. So I really think that that is a great model. And I know there's other models around the world that can help to mitigate solutions. I think also a lot of our homeless people are gifted in many different ways. And I think digital economies could really help to create our people that are homeless to be proactive in the economies of creating things that are tangible that they can sell online without needing an office or anything like that. I think that that's a huge way of creating something miraculously that they can engage in and be proud of because everybody wants to contribute. Everybody has a gift. And I really feel that instead of looking at people that they're a hindrance to society, that they all have gifts and start with talking about their gifts instead of their liabilities. Because in the world that we see right now, when we see a person on the street, a lot of times people see them as a liability, don't want to engage. So we have to change that lens from homeless to hope and see everybody that they were born from the Creator, from God, that they have a gift here and a purpose. That is the most important thing.
I think a lot of homeless people lose hope and feel that they don't have a purpose. And often that's what starts to spiral downwards. And I think what you're saying about helping with jobs, employment, finding what it is that makes people tick. As you say, everybody has a purpose. It just needs to be uncovered. And it's finding out what that is. Now, when people find themselves on the street, it's a shock, a huge shock to the system. When it happened to me, I just thought, how on earth can this be happening to me? I don't feel like I'm a typical homeless person. But the thing is, it can happen to anybody. Now, one of the things when you are on the street and on your own is that you are very, very lonely. So whilst you might see somebody putting some money into a box a homeless person is sitting beside, what's probably more important is taking the time to sit down and talk to them. Listen to their story. How did you get here? What happened? What are your gifts? What can we do to help you? How can we move you on from this situation? Even just a conversation when you're sitting there on your own with nothing else, a conversation with a stranger can lift you quite a lot. More so often than money. It's time and connection that people need.
I agree with you. A lot of people, sometimes when we get into that vessel of being homeless or insignificant to the world, we feel like that. Just that engagement. How are you today? That simplest, those simple words are door openers. Creating those door openers of conversation, even smiling. Body language is 70% of the language that people hear and see out there or feel. And when you have that welcoming energy, it's kind of like wrapping around a blanket around them. That human touch. I had a grandmother who was very much like this. My grandmother would take even people that didn't even know how to read into her home, and she would mentor them and teach them how to read. The basic skills of reading. And we need to create those hubs of opportunities. And those opportunities exist every day when we see people. But what can we do to open that door for that person and say, hello, how are you? Can I help you in any way? Or what is your gifts? What would you like to share with me today? And sometimes it's navigating them to the next step. So I think it's, you know, definitely engaging. Connection is so important. And seeing the spirit of that person as human, just like us. There's no difference in God's eyes. We're all made the same.
Absolutely. The Dutch, I think, are very good at putting together wraparound projects. They're also very good at supporting people. In particular, they have, for instance, special housing for elderly people, which are in their own communities. Now, there are pros and cons with regard to that, but it means that people are not so lonely. They also look at people's lifestyles. Why have you become homeless? What happened? Often it can be from relationship breakups. It can be, as you've mentioned, people fleeing violence in the home. Now, that can be men, women, and children.
Mm-hmm.
It can be people losing jobs. It can be people becoming ill, mentally and physically. So it's a question of those who have the resources and the power looking at the things that contribute towards homelessness and then putting together a structured plan to enable people to help themselves whilst giving them the support to get out of that situation. So it might start off with temporary homes, temporary housing, and we don't have the tiny homes here, but they're a really good idea. I'm sure that there'd be lots of political opposition to block that, but it's definitely a way forward. It gives people a roof over their heads whilst they can get the rest of their lives together. Now, some of those people might have addiction problems, they might have drink problems, they might not. Others might have mental health problems. But with regard to all of these things, it's a question of putting in the support and a plan in place to move them, as you said, to the next stage and then to the next stage so that they can become fully independent again. It's a question, I think, to a large extent of political will and education.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of people will tend to look at a homeless person and never see themselves in that position. Can't happen to me, can never happen to me. It is there by the grace of God. It can happen to anybody, increasingly so. So I think it's something that should be taught in schools. It's something that people ought to be aware of from an early age so that they don't grow up with preconceived ideas of homeless people, and also having awareness as to what they can do to help other people, as well as to try and avoid being in that situation themselves.
I agree with you 100%. Life skills are so important, especially for young people today, to have those ideas of being safe, survival skills. We've gotten away from that. Theories in a lot of different subjects do not help us at times when we're homeless. Life skills from the beginning, and perhaps co-op housing, communal housing, going back to the old ways with I know here that the TP philosophy or communities, people used to survive in this country in teepees. And what I love about it is that there was teepees all around. There'd always be fires within the center. There'd be cooking, people cooking all the time, and people taking care of each other. So if we can have hubs of those realities, every community has parks. Why can't we have TP communities on all sides of the city instead of encroaching all the homeless people into institutions downtown, into these homeless shelters where they don't feel safe? That's why a lot of people don't go to these shelters. Why don't we create safe hubs where people actually take care of each other and they help to govern their own spaces, because we need to create those safe spaces and have a communal kitchen, bathing facilities, everything. Why can't we create those things? Because the parks in the winter are usually not quite active. So why can't we animate some of these spaces that are not being utilized, or even some of these buildings? Like I said, there's buildings throughout the whole city, to create those hubs of nourishment to heal. Um, Another thing too is that the erosion of family, the networks. If you don't have family and support, create your hubs of supports. Who could that be? Adopt a brother, adopt a sister, to help people to navigate through housing. It just takes one person to help navigate a person back into wellness. How did you I need to ask you, Tony, how did you navigate that? Was there somebody there that helped you?
At times there were, and there were two families who took me in for a period in my teens when I was homeless, and that gave me a base. And without their help, I probably wouldn't be here today. After that, when I found myself homeless, it was the kindness of other people, other homeless people, getting together with them and then planning a way forward together. And this is the thing about being homeless. You need other people around you. It's very hard on your own. So if there is some community of homeless people that can come together and work together, it's far easier than on your own. As you say, there's that care element, which is there, which you don't get when you're on your own. Might take some time to foster that, but it's the best way to be, the best way to go forward. Then everybody, if you're lucky, is in a community that looks out for each other. So when I got together with these people to put together a short life housing co-op, everybody helped everybody else. We were living in houses that were substandard. We had to bring them up to building regulation standard to move in, but then they had lots of other things missing. So everybody would roll their sleeves up and help everybody else make their homes as habitable as possible. So that was it, a great community spirit, and everybody helping everybody else. which you don't get when you're on your own. So with regard to who does this, the local authorities, government, or whoever need to provide people who are trained in this, who can support people. It needs to be a mixture of things. So, for instance, your background is social services, and then it needs people who are experts in property developing, making places habitable, renovating places. And then it needs people who are experts in employment and training. And all of these people need to be brought together to help improve the life chances of those homeless people.
So it's a multi-pronged approach to getting to the next level. And I think that's beautiful because so many people have gifts to share, especially in these different areas. So the expertise and knowledge of, like life skills to employability or education, whichever field they go in, to, finding supports to help to navigate. It sounds to me like a wraparound system, that really is going to be effective in helping to deal with the homeless issues around the world.
And I think it comes back to what you mentioned as well, about life skills. Why are kids not taught about finance in schools? This would go a long way to helping children as they grow up to acquire the necessary life skills to navigate the systems. But because they're not taught this and just thrown into it and taught a lot of stuff that maybe isn't that useful to know, be far more helpful to teach them how the finance system works, how the welfare system works, how the tax system works, so that they have some idea as to how to navigate it and they're not just thrown in at the deep end and told, now swim.
I think that begs a larger topic too. How to be human nowadays, how to treat each other with compassion and dignity. Where are those values today instead of the almighty dollar? It's not only about the dollar, it's about a sense of belonging. We need people to feel like they belong. And I know that this aspect of it has been taken away from our communities. Where are the values gone? People are just chasing the money and forgot what they're here for, really. We're all born with a spirit to live every day. And what is our purpose on a day to day basis? Those basic fundamentals are so important for these children nowadays in schools. We've forgotten how to get from being a great human being to growing up to being a spectacular citizen in society. The rites of passages have eroded over the years. They don't talk about that in schools. This is something that our communities do to celebrate our children. We help to bring them up in a way where they have that sense of belonging. We forgot about ceremony. We forgot about that spirit of that human being. And when we forget about that spirit, we forget about the basic needs of a human, that love that blankets them and brings them back to humanity and care, like a mother does with her child. Let's go back to those fundamentals and give them everything they need to thrive. So I think the human economy is the most important. The spiritual economy, giving people that hope and wrapping around all the other necessary things that come to light. Positive energy, because we all have that energy. You're a beautiful light, Tony. Aron, you're a beautiful light. You have so many gifts to bring to the world. And I know that you out there listening to this has a gift. Let's get back to humanity and let's care, collaborate, and change the world together.
if we could imagine a world that's already done, what do you think it would look like?
I feel it's going back to the feminine presence of honoring our mother, number one. When we honor our Mother Earth, she sustains us. Everything is there for every human being, and the rights of human beings are not being adhered to. The rights to basic water, the rights to housing, the rights to free speech, the rights to live our lives optimally. Let's do the best we can do to bridge all these gaps and come together as a humanity to care, collaborate, and change the world.
That's
That's my
such an important message. And there is such a need for ethics, which is missing. The other thing is that we've been divided, and particularly over the COVID period, it became even more clear how we're being divided. Being divided along the lines of gender, along the lines of race, along the lines of age. It was pretty difficult to watch, and the media obviously played a part in this, and it helped create those divisions rather than bringing people together. So when society is divided and people get marginalized, so all the problems, well, it's all the homeless people, and that separates them from those who have somewhere to live, or it's all the youngsters doing this, or it's all some other category of person doing that, or it's the old people because they cost too much now, they're too much of a drain on the economy. All of these things are put into people's heads to divide us so that we don't come together. Because if we do come together, we'd be a formidable force for the good. And I think that we just have to understand that society sometimes does not operate in our best interests in the way that it separates and divides. And if we stop doing that, as you're saying, Lise, and if we do look after each other, look at what is common between us rather than what's different, and help each other, then we will thrive. Because there is no need to have such huge disparity between rich and poor. The rich cannot sleep at night because they're worried in case the poor are coming to take it away from them. Well, if some of those people helped the poor people more, then they'll be able to sleep better at night. Now, it's a very simplistic argument, but it's a very simplistic issue. If things are spread around a little more evenly, then you don't get so much fighting and aggravation between the haves and the have-nots.
I agree 100% with you. There's so much wealth around the world. We can share our wealth by sharing our humanity, resources, and help people to thrive. We all want to flourish in this world. And it's by taking care and speaking up and sharing our wisdom to help with creating a legacy for the next generations to come. Because the way things are going right now, by creating a human revolution, I believe is what is needed to, deal with that fear. That fear is not a propaganda that I live by. I live by resilience, and that today we are taking care of. Just like when I see that sun come up in the morning and I see those birds singing and chirping out there, I am a spirit like that. I will rise up too and I will shine. And I will make my ancestors proud that I lived here and I spoke up for those voiceless people that are suffering in the cold, that need to be housed, loved, and cared for from a human philosophy and spiritual realm. That's who I am. I am a mother, I am a human being, and I'm here to make that profound change through my voice.
And I think when you're looking at it from that level, globally, as a species, how much do we spend on killing each other as opposed to feeding each other and housing each other. Big discrepancy.
That's the question. And thank you for bringing that up. You know, saving lives can be incredible. We can save millions of people's lives without having to go into the dark side and enlighten people.
I want to say, guys, thank you so much for your conversation. It's been wise, enlightening, and wow, it just shows you that we have a possibility to change the world as change makers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aron, for hosting us. It's spectacular to meet Tony and have these conversations.
Thank you, both of you. Pleasure meeting you.
There you go. It just shows that two individuals in the UK and Canada sharing their wisdom, knowledge, and experience. And look, we have a home that we can be fulfilled in, to have the homefulness ability to be safe, be secure, and achieve our greatest achievement and goal. So make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, because we're on a mission to change the paradigm shift from homelessness to homefulness, to allow each individual to allow their gift to shine in the home that they can feel safe in.
Homefulness sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But there's a huge intention behind it. Change the paradigm. To achieve a state of homefulness needs a kind of thinking that has never happened before. We want you to join us, to help us create a vision for the whole of Ireland and its people.
And now,